Thank you so much for joining us for this third and final day of Chakshu. It's been a longer showcase than before, but these are some of the curatorial problems one learns to live with when you're doing something as interesting as this. Today's curation was particularly unique because it contained five voices that actually presented the program, uh, presented their films that they had specifically made for Chakshu. Apart from that, we have had some very significant uh, filmmakers, patrons, and those who are pushing the genre of dance filmmaking. And it is my privilege now to invite them to join today's panel. And I'd like to first welcome Dr. Anita Ratnam. We all know her as an excellent artist, as an arts entrepreneur. I have always referred to her as a pioneer of our times because it was a vision of Nartaki, which is the largest portal on Indian dance, that has really allowed so much. It has become one of the biggest archives of Indian dance in contemporary times. Welcome, Anita. I hope, hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good to have
Hi.
you here. I'd like to invite onto our panel now Douglas Rosenberg, who is who brings an enormous amount of talent and experience onto our panel. He's a professor of video performance and installation at the art department of the University of Wisconsin, of which he's also currently the chair. You saw his film Circling, and we really are glad to have him. Consider ourselves very fortunate that he could join us. And what has been really lovely is that he's joined us on all 3 days, so we can really have a very expansive conversation with him. Welcome, Douglas. Good to have you here. I see that you haven't joined us yet, but that may be a technicality, and I'll leave the technical team to deal with that. I invite also Sumedha Bhattacharya. She is a young dancer and young filmmaker, but she is a leader amongst the younger generation to be using dance and the camera. Hello, everyone, including Sumedha. Hi, Douglas. Uh, she is a leader to be using the whole idea of dance and the camera, not just in her work, that means not just in performance, but as an independent genre. And she's actually invested in pushing this whole art form further. We'll talk to her in greater details about what efforts she has been making. I also welcome the first of the five dancers who made dance films specifically for Chakshu, Pavitra Bhatt, Bharatnatyam dancer. Welcome, Pavitra. Yes, and hi, nice to have you with us. Uh, Prachi Sathi. Prachi, yeah, hello. Good to have you with us. Prachi was the Bharatnatyam dancer whose film you saw about slowing down, Raftar Karo Kam. We have a filmmaker in the Odissi dancer and the head of dance programming at NCPA, Swapna Kalpa, but unfortunately, I got a message saying that she's having internet problems and will not be able to join us, which is such a pity because I think that it was a very interesting presentation that she did. And may I invite Sangeeta Chatterjee, my partner in this whole Chakshu project and the owner of the cultural equity called Chakshu. And last but not the least, the editor of Sangeeta's film, Lubdak Chatterjee. Could you join us as well, Lubdak? Because we'd like to have this conversation with you. Even as I get ready to start the conversation, I would like to acknowledge the presence of professors, of critics, of dancers from across the world, including iconic and senior dancers from neighboring countries and from distant lands who have all joined us. They're too numerous for me to try and list out right now. I'm humbled by your presence. Thank you so much for joining us. So, without further ado, I would like to begin asking the questions and involving opening the panel discussion. So, Anita, may I start with you? We used your films to open today's performance, and we actually used a picture of yours, by the way, for today's promotion. I wonder if you got to see it. So thank you. You've been a sort of partner in the process, discussing and ideating on the side as well with us. I'd like you, my first question to you really is to ask you your specific role in the two series that which we had a representation of, which you initiated, Boxed and Andal's Garden. So how did the idea come to you, and how much hand-holding was required when you came up with the idea?
Thank you, Arshia, and I'm very delighted to be on the panel. I hope you can hear me. I hope it's, yes. So Boxed was ideated a week after India went into lockdown, which I'm talking of late March, early April 2020. And, that was the time when we were all trying to negotiate how we actually organize our lives. But we were watching America and Europe and, aghast at the calamity and the loss of life. And somehow we felt a little removed from that, except that we had to deal with the inconvenience of a national lockdown. So my mind was churning, and I made a call to my friend in London, and I said, look, we're all locked in our homes. We can't go anywhere. I want to use this idea of being locked in, of being boxed. And this is what I want to do. So between Chitra Sundaram in London and myself, I said, look, this is what we need to do. Don't give dancers more than 2 minutes. 2 minutes now is going to seem like an eternity on film, not on stage, but an eternity on film. All the dancers were either living alone or in very, very small units. We reached out to classical dancers and contemporary dancers, and all of them only had access to their cell phones. So the mandate was, you're boxed. You either create your own music or we'll give you music, original music, and choose one place in your home where just make a choice. It can be wherever. So we had bathroom, we had bedroom, we had the bed, we had the doorway. This particular place was the kitchen counter. The dancer, by the way, is a classical Bharatanatyam dancer from Cape Town, but he's a Kalakshetra student. So you can imagine what he was trying to do. So the 2 minutes, and we said you're allowed 2 camera angles, but you can play with technology. Go do whatever software you're downloading. But we had a technical team in India, in Bangalore, guiding them about camera angles. I think this might be better. So there was a lot of conversations between the dancer and our tech team. In fact, this past year, Arshia, I've only done 3 hiring, and all 3 have been on the technical side. Camera people and editors, because I find that has been a whole new world. So Boxed was actually ideated so early in the pandemic. We premiered on the 16th of May, and we went on for 7 weekends, all the way through May, June, and early July. And we had a variety of dancers from across the world. So it was really an illumination of their condition, their human condition. They were allowed to use either classical tradition, free movement, very simple everyday clothes, no dance clothes. That was the mandate. And we were quite tight in the curation. We really gave them a lot of feedback. We said, this is really interesting, and why don't you try it with a camera up, down? So the tech team was in conversation with the dancers. So that was Boxed. And you saw Sarvation on the kitchen counter using software.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah, and the music was by his brother. His brother's the composer. So that also made it really, really interesting, and the kind of blackouts in between. These are things that you can do when you do dance for camera. These are what you can do that you can't do always on stage. Andal's Garden was more specific. It was more narrative. It was ideated and created in the month of December. So we have like a 6-7 month gap between Boxed and Andal's Garden. And Andal is a Tamil mystic saint poet of the 8th, 9th century, Common Era. She wrote in Tamil, so the lyrics had to be Tamil in adoration of Krishna, but we reached across classical genre, across all classical styles. So here was a Kathak group in Bangalore attempting Tamil poetry for the very first time. What was our mandate as a producer? Go outdoors, because Andal is said to have written and imagined sitting in her garden adjacent to the temple, in her temple town. So that the next mandate was, don't wear what is iconic in Andal's photographs, which is a top knot on the side and an open garland. So you can wear your costume, whatever style you want, but go outdoors. And that was a beautiful, Madhu Nataraj's clip, that piece that I picked, was an example of how that poem was actually storyboarded. She created a storyboard for the camera, something that dancers don't necessarily do. We see a lot of dance frontal to the camera, and maybe we have 2 cameras or 3 cameras, and then we have either dissolves or cuts. But this was actually storyboarded with the lyrics, and it had embedded the story of Ram and Ravan. Ram goes to Lanka to rescue his wife. You know, so you could see that there were many elements that that the dancer used. Madhu Nataraj herself has studied film. And so we had that extra element, an advantage that she brought into the work. But I was very specific that the lyrics had to stay in Tamil, not translated into Hindi or translated into Malayalam, because we had dancers of all styles. But you saw between Boxed and Andal's Garden 2 very distinct styles. But both of them pushed certain triggers and boundaries within their own confines. One right locked in their home without anywhere to go.
Yeah.
And Andal, 6 months later, when the world opened up, India was also opening up and people were allowed to go out. So location was also critical in terms of how both series were framed.
And thank you, Anita. And I can imagine that you got this idea and you were very clear in your brief to all the participants, all the dancers. And by the way, let me just point out that I didn't know at that time that Madhu had studied film. I mean, I didn't know this till you just mentioned. But you may remember a shot where there is a bowing down moment and the foot. My God, the diagonal was so beautiful. It was not an opportunistic diagonal. It was something that had been planned and conceived of earlier, you know. It was consciously achieved. Anyway, what I was saying is that your brief must have been absolutely clear because you too have a camera background in the sense that you were a television producer in the United States. So my question to you now is, do you live your film dreams through work that you commission, or is there anything that you are making yourself as well?
Well, I have a master's degree in film and television from the United States. And I worked as a television producer for 10 years in New York. But my weekly TV show was about news and current affairs. So it was all about going out into the street, capturing, events, incidents, or in studio, where people would come and be interviewed. And I'm talking of the 1980s, where even cutting was much more traditional. But then came MTV, and MTV changed the rules of the game. You had what was called staccato cutting, jump cutting. We had the music video industry that really changed the way that editing and how time got compressed. So my background in film, I would say, and television was more traditional because I was producing a weekly television program, and it was weekly programmed every single week for 10 years. So you don't get opportunities to make films for dance. I was actually a producer. I was the host. I was on camera, and I was getting a team to come in on deadline, and we did a variety of subjects. I was the producer for the Festival of India series in the US, Arshia. So I got a chance to watch a lot of live arts and sculpture and the things that happened out in the park and in the big theaters. And museums and galleries. And so it was a great, it was a fantastic time. It was 10 years of great learning. But what I did learn was on American television, they said at that time in the 80s that even God doesn't get more than 7 minutes, which meant that time was of the essence. And that's something that I really want to stress when we make films, that, you know, we can compress time. We can collapse it and expand it. Because when you do dance for camera, camera is also a performer. The camera becomes a performer. And I think that we in India, especially classical dancers, are just beginning to understand what the possibilities are. I've loved cinema. I've acted in 2 feature films. So I'm familiar with the medium even on the other side. And I have made a couple of films during this pandemic, which I've done within the confines of my home. I've called it Motherland. At some point, we'll get a chance to see it, not in this session. But I've been actually more excited about commissioning and ideating and working with young dancers. You know, how do you take an idea, even a traditional idea, and how do you really work with the concept of storyboarding, and how does every shot and every camera angle, why it is so important to plan it, so that you can actually, it comes out as a different composite. It comes out as a different performance of its own. It has a different avatar of its own. And it's not just camera capturing a dancer doing a performance.
Right.
So that's what I'm very, I'm interested in that. I'm excited about it, about the possibilities that a dancer, a dancing body, and a camera can do, especially
Right.
with the kind of access to technology, and we have and we can cut costs. We don't have to spend the kind of money that we thought we had to spend even 5 years ago.
Right. So thank you so much. I have one more question that I want to ask before I let you off, and then maybe bring you on again in another context. But the question is about the first film that we saw, Boxed. You know, I loved the way the credits came at the end. I think credit giving is a very conscious and generous act, and it really is a fair act. How do I, you know, you get the point that I'm trying to make. Now,
Yes.
yesterday we had a film which did not have credits at all, because that's how the filmmaker particularly wanted it to be, sort of, you know, disappearing, light, walking lightly kind of a thing. But in Boxed, we had the credits with photographs of all the other participants, you know, the editor, the music person. Actually, I was seeing this for the first time, and it really touched me. And I think it's a good act to follow.
I've insisted they're all my team, and we all must have put faces to the names.
Yes.
You know, and so whenever I can, I try to do that.
Right. Thank you so much, Anita. We'll get back to you shortly.
Thank
Doug,
you.
may I speak to you next, please? And I really am torn, because I don't want to waste even a single second that we all have with you, in not being able to sort of absorb the gems that you're going to sort of share with us. I hope so, when we ask you more generic questions. But just as a starting point from the film that we saw today, your quote of Rilke, the widening circles quote. Our effort today is actually one of those. We've been reaching out in these widening circles over many days, many years, and we've reached this point when we have this robust dance film community gathered here. Every day we've had close to 80, 85, nearly 100 people watching. It's not so easy to raise these kind of numbers for something like dance film, because people aren't convinced as yet, even yet. Maybe after this, I think this is the tipping point. So thank you very much for reminding me about the widening circles. And my question specifically to you about this particular piece is that so much danced in circles in the film that you showed us, whether it was the dancer's main body or the smaller limbs, the grains on the wooden floor, the music and the musicians, the camera per se, the black and white of the treatment, the inside and the outside, the spiritual and not so spiritual spaces. Now, Indian dancers are well aware of the power, including the spiritual content of a circling. I was wondering if you would like to talk a little bit about the philosophy of this work, because spiritual we know it was. So I think that there is an instant connect with it. Just lead us through the process and the thoughts that you carried with you as you ideated this film and produced it.
I think you just explained it perfectly. No, I don't. I can go now. But
I hope you're joking. I'm just about to tell you a funny story. I once spoke a lot, and the other person said, "Yes, that's right."
But I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I feel a little bit like an intruder, because you have an incredible community, and what Anita just had to say to us about screen dance and dance film and everything is extraordinary. And the work that I've seen is extraordinary. So I feel very much like a guest here, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. But I do want to answer your questions. So the I don't want to take too much time, but where I live here with my wife, Chao Ping, is out in the country. And we've been here in this place for 20 some years. And so my own personal practice, kind of in all areas, has become very much attuned with the landscape and the seasons. And add to that, as you're right, a certain spirituality that comes from my own practice, my own sort of life in Jewish culture. And I came across Sally Gross's work in another film. I saw a documentary about her maybe 10 years ago. No, more, maybe 15 years ago. And was just enthralled with her work. And I have a part of my own life research, which is about thinking about the connection between Jewishness, Jewish practice, and art generally. So I invited her to come to be part of an event that I did, and I got to know her, and I asked her if she would be interested in making a film with me, or allowing me to make a film with her. And she was one of the original people in the Judson Church group in New York in the 60s. So the kind of dance that you may know this, the kind of dance that Judson Church was interested in was the opposite of virtuosic. It was much more about the quotidian. I think to a certain extent, there were a number of people who had a kind of spiritual way of being in the world. And Sally particularly is both Jewish and a practicing Buddhist for 40 years. So I brought her to we have a farm here where we do workshops. I brought her here as a teacher to teach our community a number of things. And one of the things she taught us were these walking meditations, Buddhist walking meditations that we did in straight lines, but we also did in circles. And it just was something that really enthralled me. And so that's how we got to that film, actually. The film was kind of based on the experience of learning these walking meditations and creating a space for Sally to improvise in the way that she does, or she's passed now. She passed away 3 or 4 years ago, I think. But as a mover, she was an improviser completely.
Mm-hmm. So when you do a dance film, we've had a question that was asked actually on day one towards the end of the program, which asked me to ask our panelists the principles of choreographing for the camera. Since you're in the business of teaching this as well, I think you might be the one who will be able to do the most focused answering of this.
Well, you might be disappointed. I think what Anita just described about storyboarding and planning of shots and a very kind of particular way to to do the pre-production work for dance films. I understand and I respect greatly, and to a certain extent I do that. But I'm very much interested in creating spaces where things can happen that one would not expect. So, for instance, in circling and a lot of my films, I spend more time creating a community of support. Picking sort of locations that seem appropriate, working with musicians, trying to always use original music and to have the musicians involved in the process if there is music, and to create all of the support system so that in the moment when the camera gets turned on, something can happen that we never would have imagined. And so that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say in answer to your question is about the idea of intentionality. And I know in a lot of the work that I've seen in the last few days, and this is similar for work that I see here in the States or anywhere, really, there's a kind of a tension between, on the one end, a kind of documentation of choreographic work, a kind of work with the camera that reinforces and preserves the linearity of choreography that may have been made for an entirely different situation previously. So perhaps it was made for a theater, perhaps it's traditional dance, and then what we're seeing is some kind of an adaptation of that. At the other end of the spectrum, which is for me personally where my own work is a space where the intentionality is to make a project that can only exist within the space of the architecture of the camera and of the space and the architecture of the camera. So it's inseparable from that process. In other words, you couldn't really take that dance and bring it back to the stage in the same way.
So it's never dance for the stage that really comes into play when we make a dance film, because it has to be approached from a totally different way of seeing it as well, right?
Well, this is just my opinion. I mean, I think everybody has their own path, so I don't want to prescribe anything for anybody. But for me personally, where my interest lies is in making work that is a primary experience. And by primary experience, I mean the intentionality of the work that I make is that it be seen on a screen in a dark room, preferably with other people, if you remember that, what it was like, as a kind of sacred communion, frankly. Right. I mean, I think there's a power in that kind of space that's different from other spaces. So, you know, as far as rules go, you know, I've written a lot about what I think screen dance is or should be, but I wouldn't impose that on anybody, really.
I have many more questions that I want to ask you, but right away, at this point, I'm going to take a break and ask Sangeeta, who had flagged me that there is something very important that she wants to ask you. So, Sangeeta, maybe this is the moment that you do it.
Thank you, Ashadi, and thank you, Douglas. So that it's really fascinating to see your work, and I have been reading few of your articles. It's really fascinating. I really didn't want to lose out on this opportunity to ask you something which I read on one of your articles, and you spoke about something called recorporealization in terms of screen dance, where you said that the body is raw material for reconceptualizing of corporeality. So it's really, when I read that, I could imagine what you are trying to say, but if, you know, you are the best person, if you could, you know, lead me or lead all of us and explain a bit about it. And your book, Inscribing the Ephemeral Image, the title in itself speaks volume. Though I haven't read, I would need a lot of time to immerse myself into it. but I am really intrigued to even listen to the title, which in itself is so powerful. So just let us know about this.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning that. So I'm going to start with the ephemeral image part first, and remind me if I forget to go back to the recorporealization, please. But there's a great book that I read called Migrations of a Gesture, and it talks about, it's I think 10 different examples of how gestures become inscribed, how gestures become inscribed in the universe. So for instance, a pen on paper inscribes a mark, both a mark and an impression. So that's pretty simple, we know that. And then she goes through a lot of other possibilities, and then she gets to dance. So she talks about where does dance inscribe itself? Because it is so ephemeral. It doesn't impress a surface. It sort of is gone after it's performed. Gestures, are fleeting. And I thought about that. And what I thought about in relation to screen dance was that I think I wrote in that essay you're talking about, that where dance inscribes itself is on the body of the viewer. I think dance impresses something literally on the body of the viewer, and that's where that is inscribed. And I think by extension, then, what I was trying to say and what you noted was the idea that dance also inscribes itself in film and video, right? That it lives literally forever in that recording of itself. So inscribing the ephemeral image, that's what I was talking about. So once we've inscribed those gestures and the movement that we've been looking at, then this idea of recorporealization comes in. And where that comes from is, we talk about the corporeal all the time. And what I was talking about with that idea was that, and I used the example of Frankenstein, right? Or a Frankenstein, that Frankenstein was actually a body made of disparate parts, right? It was a body that had no life and was recorporealized through kind of stitching of other pieces of other bodies to make a whole body. But it didn't really look like what we would consider to be a normative body, I guess. So that idea sort of led me to this notion of thinking about, where dance lives on bits of digital code or on film, if we're working in film, and how one literally kind of cuts those bits, and then recorporealizes them to create something that it just isn't possible. So for example, if you've ever seen Maya Daren's film with Tali Beatty, that ends with this leap into space by the dancer. And he stays up in space for a very, very long time, an impossible amount of time. So that's a perfect example to me of how we can use film or the moving image to recorporealize a body and make it do things that it just can't otherwise do. Make it move in ways that would otherwise break or strain the physical body. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Doug. I have some more practical kind of questions to ask you, but maybe I would like to return when we reach the more practical part of the conversations. And I move now, thank you, I move to Sumedha. Sumedha, hi. So Sumedha and I have been in conversation for a long time on the films that she makes and the work that she does. And the first question I want to ask you is something I don't think I ever warned you about, and I don't think I ever realized till I saw this film just now. And by the way, you mentioned, Doug, that we should see the films together, and our effort to be on Zoom, even though technically the film quality falls a little bit, but to create this Zoom room was exactly this, so that we could all see it together. So Sumedha, my question to you is, most films carry a year, 2012, 2020, whatever. Yours carries a very specific date. 8th of May 2020. Now, I really find it hard to believe that a film really gets made from beginning to end. That means from the seed of the idea to its final product in one day. Did it actually happen like that? If so, you have to tell us about how you telescope filmmaking into this one-day process.
Oh, it's interesting that you shared that. Because if I had to answer that question, it's a brilliant question, Shelly. Thank you. Firstly, I'm so glad to be with all of you here, and it is actually it would be I can't deny the fact that the kind of topic that I was kind of exploring here has been a questioning since the time I was actually dancing with the camera on stage in Bangladesh when we met in 2019. But the questioning process and the inquiry that started from then, and probably this was happening just after the lockdown is happening and the transition that we are seeing. Um, the making of it, and as Douglas was sharing, was really happening with the spurt of a moment. It really happened then and there. I did not plan this. Of course, there was these questions that I was having and conversing with my collaborator here in the sound designer here. But the questions and the conversations and the memory of that suddenly took a turn, and it was in between I literally having a meal probably, and then taking the camera and playing with that memories that I had all along, and just see what will happen. It exactly happened that way. So it was kind of playing with unpredictability a lot. Intuition, what comes after, I don't really want to question what is. I'm not making it for someone at all at that time when I was doing it. So it is in a way very improvisational that happened at that moment without even a sound being placed here, but just to see what comes up if I hold the camera myself, invert it, and subvert the gaze, and see and have a conversation. What will happen? And that's what happened.
Your themes are always very unpredictable. You've already used the word to describe it yourself, so I'm taking advantage and riding on it. And so unpredictable that most Kathak dancers, because your primary training has been in Kathak, when we saw you perform in Bangladesh, you used a film as part of performance. And in fact, there is a question that has come up from Mom Ganguly, herself a Mohiniyattam dancer, where she says, can dance film be used as part of performance? And is that likely to be one of the trends that we are going to see, kind of a thing, way forward? So you have already used dance film as part of performance. Vikram Iyengar has used dance film as part of performance in Bahuda. Increasingly, I am seeing this process. But dance film as dance film and filmed dance as part of performance, would they be two separate things, or actually they are part of the same process as it is moving?
Well, I think it's again, I think it is definitely also a lot about intentionality, as Douglas was talking about. What is your intention? If your intention is dancing for the camera, then you would do that, and you may find ways in which you want to, translate your idea here. But if it is because it's also a lot about what kind of control, which kind of control that you're giving. If you want to give a control of to the technology itself, and you want to use the technology as a way of being service to me, being in service of me, or like what is your thought process is very important here, I guess. Is it something to accentuate your performance, or you are trying to, as a performer yourself, trying to allocate a role to the camera, treating the camera maybe as a subject here? So the technology and how you're using the technology probably defines a lot in ways in which probably you will take which turn, I guess. It can also be a hybrid. But I mean, I just wanted to share that bit. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense to me because I have seen that performance, so I know what how it can play multiple roles as well. Um,
And just to add to that, because you said did you in that same performance, I guess technology comes very much later. I guess the conversation or the ways in which what you are working with the camera here as. So for me, the metaphor of the camera with taking the metaphor of a god is important, and what then happens and what then unfolds is completely different. So that was, and trying to find ways in which you can have a bodily understanding, as Douglas was sharing, the camera, and if you can perform the edit through your body, say for example, I guess that's what it was in that performance as well. I was just repeating one composition again and again. So definitely draws a lot from philosophies of Kathak and the ways in which unpredictability, intuition, improvisation are intrinsic to my training in Kathak.
so
Yeah.
all this business that you're saying about Kathak and tradition and all that, um, you are amazing in your ability to leave all that and get on to today's unrelated to Kathak kind of themes. In a previous occasion, I've had the chance to curate another different piece, which was about surveillance. No dances in India, I mean, the classical tradition, talk about subjects like this, difficult subjects. So, what draws you then? I mean, what is the eye that sees the possibilities of Kathak to even deal with a subject like this? Oh God.
Whoa. I think I guess of course it has a lot of factors in which what changes your thought processes, and I think it was never a sudden shift. There were a lot of inspiring works that I also, and I think Maya Deren was mentioned today, so I just got really excited. Maya Deren and even in India, Pramod Bati's Explorer, say, the ways in which it's not a dance film, but the ways in which he's exploring, it's called Explorer, and the ways in which he's exploring edit as a dancing process. So, of course, these are inspirations that definitely open your worldview as a viewer, and also, I guess. It is to do and really accept the certain facts that you are uncomfortable with as a Kathak dancer or as someone who would like to continue or sustain my own practice as an independent artist too. So surveillance comes as something that I've been as a woman. I think my subjectivity comes from also accepting certain facts, accepting and unpacking, probably questioning becomes that process of the film becomes the questioning or the questions itself.
I think you've stated it beautifully. Thank you so much. My last question, unless I come back to you again, is about the new initiatives that you have taken to encourage dance film amongst younger generation dancers, the international linkages that you're forging. You're virtually forcing people to look at this as a possibility. Um, and okay, you can choose to answer this question. I hope you do. But I hope you will also answer the question that Manjari Sinha has asked of you, which is you use the parhant of the Kathak bowls very imaginatively. What was your idea behind that? So please answer this one first, because we can come back to my question later. This is in continuity with the thought.
I think I'm guessing this question is for a different piece here, but it's a very important question actually. I think Luptak is also here. He also had used to ask me this question: how do you approach parent? And it's a really an ongoing process and work in progress. But I think a lot of it is what this inscription that Douglas was talking about. How do you really think about that parhant as sometimes as a text, sometimes as a sound, in through different lenses of discipline? So what would an architect think of a parhant, say, and really listening to them makes a whole lot of change in your own practice, which is what I've realized over a period of time. For
And
sound
parhant is
design,
not fixed. Padhant is another area of an oral scape that you create. Just as you're creating a dance film, you're creating an oral scape by playing with the Padhant.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really, I think I probably go very curious about asking these with very bizarre disciplines away from dance to think of how they understand something that I would like to share, say, for example. So for the sound designer here, for him, it is a code. He understands this Kathak as an ancient code. And that changed the way my perception of Kathak is, you know. Just a small example to answer that question, but also to just quickly share what Arshia asked, and probably move on then. Is I think with this duet with camera came in as in last year through a practice-based fellowship. In KCC here in India, through which I was exploring this relationship with dance and the camera, like Anita ma'am was talking about, you know, this the relationship that comes in. I think it was not only one, there were different passages that it has become. One is my own practice of understanding it with another cinematographer on board. The other is definitely a community space or a research creation lab that I envision to be, where all I'm seeing Sangeeta these also here. Everything that this kind of process that, you know, sort of instigated one thought leads to another. Collaborations came in. I saw a lot of artists here that were a part of that Instagram, just an Instagram page, but could trigger so many thoughts. You know, Lubdak was also part of that residency. So this is a research space, creation space where, you know, these people can come in together and talk and really have a conversation. And lastly, of course, from a very pedagogical space, I'm trying to do and create a module which sort of can be expanded to multiple communities. Students, university students who might not have any formal training in dance or film, or different other dancers also. You know, so how I'm working on that, but it is somewhere. These are the ways, and I see it growing and developing. Of course, we need funds. That's important.
Actually, that was a question I've held back for Douglas. A little later, we could come to it. Everybody needs funds. But one thing that helps you right now, Sumedha, is that you're associated with the university. So as part of the curriculum, you can develop many of these ideas that you are talking about. And I think you have such a large community already existing. Call upon all these people who have already taken steps in the general direction that you are pointing towards. So I hope that this community will be a very robust, long-living community and will certainly outlive many of us. Thank you so much. You had raised a question, you had raised a point, Sumedha, when you said that you have to be clear about the intention of the work, and if it is to augment your dance practice, then so be it. So with that in mind, I would like to invite the first of our filmmakers who made the film specifically for Chakshu, and that is Pavitra. Pavitra, I think this point was something that you carried in your mind as you did your work, because there were no drastic changes, but it certainly augmented immensely uh, our experience of this wonderful piece that you were doing. Would you like to talk about how and why you sort of chose this way forward? Do I see him at all or no?
Ji, I don't see him. I don't know. He
Okay.
was here
So
just now. Maybe he
somebody
has
please
lost connection.
make
So,
sure that we get on. Let me get on to the next person then,
yes.
so that we don't waste any time. And that was Anvesa, right? Is Anvesa with us, or has she also? So the eastern part of India today has had some kind of a cyclonic activity with thunderstorms, and many connections have been lost, but I'm happy to see Anvesa is here. Hello, Anvesa. Lovely
Hi.
room. Thank you. I enjoyed the stream of consciousness treatment of your inner thoughts. And just as an opening question, although subsequent questions are going to be asked by Sangeeta, I would like to just get a better understanding of it. Is this something that happens with all dancers, Or do you think it's something that is unique to a dancer from the Satriya tradition? Because the ritual aspect, it's a living tradition, both ritually and in dance. So this constant connect, divinity, Godhead, that beautiful word you used, Sakitva, wonderful. So is it something that you feel the livingness of your tradition uh, pushes you towards? And then we'll talk about the cinematic parts of it.
Okay, I think the first part, the first connection that from the present generation, the way I connect or the way I've been able to embrace the entire livingness, the word which I've used, is with this, the 9 principles, the Navadha Bhakti. And it's not necessarily I always connect it with the religious context or with the connection of God, but how do I like, for example, that's what we had explored, the entire concept of Sakitva. It's one of the principal ingredients of Navadha Bhakti, as introduced by Shankaradeva in his philosophical treatises. So Sakhitva, compassionate bond, and embracing your surrounding, inclusiveness, these were some of the ideas, because constantly what has been going on has been a lot, which includes a lot of this integratedness. So this is what we have been trying to explore, exploring the entire idea of inclusiveness. And what happened, 2020, of course, it's been a reflective period for all of us. And from from these 4 walls, though it's a reflection on solitude through which you have reached out to many. So the entire piece, as you have seen here, there are three. It's a multi-layered narrative pattern which we have used from the present thoughts that keeps on coming, which we have used, I've used the word stream of consciousness. From the Sakhi Hey is an entry point where there's a flight of imagination, and various images have been used, like from my room itself, I had seen the tree, a barren land, during one season, and all of a sudden, when the monsoons came, there was the change that we had seen in the entire surrounding. So those impressions were also used, the seasonal change that we see. Along with that, the second part is from that moment, there is the text has been interwoven, and finally you see the dance. So a cyclic pattern has been used in the entire narrative. So also I would like to say this is just my first attempt in the field of dance. Well, it's a long way, it's a learning experience. So, but one thing, the entire philosophy of bhakti and the Navadha Bhakti, 9 principles of Navadha Bhakti, that has been inspiring always, and not necessarily I always connect it from the term of religiosity.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sangeeta, would you like to take the next question? No? Okay.
I think I will, by the end of it, I will ask everyone together. Maybe if we have time, you can continue, please.
Okay. So one more question, Anvesa, to you. For your first attempt in making a dance film, this is a bold and long and detailed attempt. Why are you sounding that there is a long way to go in the next film? This is a complete film by itself. Do you not see this?
No, I always see there's always a process of evolution. There's always, we evolve each and every time. The connection with camera has been a long time, since my childhood. Because my mother, she also, she worked with Doordarshan, and as a kid, I traveled along with her when I saw her making documentary films. So there has been a friendship with the camera, and I saw the role of camera. And then also during my PhD work, where I had worked with lot of ethnic communities, I myself had filmed, but those were like more of archival references. And also with Sangeet Natak Academy, I did a project called Unmasking the Masks. So I have a documentary on the masks. So
that would have fitted in so beautifully.
but those were but saying that, that entire role of camera as I see today, uh, it's from a third point perspective where the role of the camera is an observer, and I wanted an active play of active performance by the camera, so which we have tried to explore here. And yeah, in a way the film itself is complete, but next time who knows what it would come up. I've scribbled a lot of thoughts, so let's see how it comes up, because that itself it's a teamwork, it's a different choreography, and with the camera, with the organic understanding of the physical space and the virtual space, we can explore a lot. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to first the masks, unmasking the masks, and then to the new work that you will come up with as and when, which I hope for which there will be some kind of funding. So I particularly value the presence today of both Anita and Doug, because they can direct us to where they think that there could be some possibilities. Given the fact that this scenario of not having live concerts may be with us for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see that Pavitra joined back. He's still with us. Hello, Pavitra.
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Yes.
Okay, so we missed you momentarily when I did ask a question, and that was that you use the camera very intelligently as an augmenting medium. It augmented the beauty of the work that you were showing. It is a traditional work, pure, authentic, clean, no interferences, nothing. It was the way it was. So tell us a little bit about why did you choose this path, and what possibilities in the camera and editing did you see to be able to serve your purpose, the intention you had?
First of all, thank you so much for making me part of this fantastic uh, first-time effort to work on something like this. My idea actually was something else, ma'am. Yes, my idea was something else, and unfortunately, my photographer, my videographer, and the lights person both came under COVID-19 situation, and they couldn't be part of filming it. And so then we had to take step two. So this was taken that we had to re-choreograph it in one night, and then I had to shoot it the next day, because on the consecutive day I had something else scheduled. So it was really an interesting process, because I had to also, with the lockdown, we had to record this in 2 hours with the given time. It was a commercial premises. So in Mumbai, where I live, we had really strict lockdown rules. Mm-hmm. So then I had to finish the shoot in 2 hours, and it was very, very intelligently. We had to cut short the choreography and then think of every aspect. So as Anitaji mentioned, storyboard, which was very important for us. So that night when I sat with my friend who's a photographer, he just brought his camera, and then we just thought, let us try something new. And then that's when the thought process started. So my actual thought was to go to a hill nearby, which is really nearby my house, and shoot the early morning sun rays. Because the song speaks, it's a Divya Prabandham, which speaks about Sri Ranganatha, the reclining Lord. When the whole universe is giving a hint that I think the Lord has woken up. I think this might be the reason everything is just hushing and rushing towards Ranganatha's that abode. So I think like sun has just woken up. I think the cool breeze which is just coming from that far hill is just because Ranganatha would have opened his eyes. Or that fragrance which is just coming from that little lily which is opening up is maybe because the first ray of sun is just falling on the earth. or maybe the dewdrops which have fallen, which have just opened their eyes, and then maybe just because of that little bit tiny sound of chirping birds would have opened eyes of those tender leaves which are just coming out of the tree. So these hints we wanted to capture through camera and dance. And but then I think it's also the step two was actually interesting because I had to think on the other side, and how when we do not have any properties and dance becomes itself the whole it creates an ambience, and from the camera point of view.
Right.
So that's how we had to think the whole process.
So I have two things to say to you. One, that I think your choice of piece is very encouraging. It was a very hopeful thing. Maybe
Yes.
when Ranganath's eyes open, things will become better for us. And the second thing
So
was that
yes,
now you
so
can
beautifully
certainly
put up.
say that
Yes,
COVID is
yes,
also one of the actors or players in the entire process of your films making. While we are talking about COVID, you know, it's a little aside that I mentioned to you that it was crazy. The show reels that you have seen on day one, day two, day three, and the promotional videos were all made by an editor who was home quarantined for during
wow,
COVID times, and
wow.
my heart would sink. I'd be tell me your SPO level, tell me your temperature, tell me everything, just in case, you know, the poor man. So I'd like to give a shout out here to
Yes,
Sadangi, who edited these show reels despite being COVID positive at that time. And so we are very, very grateful to him. And see how COVID actually helped you look at things differently. And
absolutely.
really
Yes,
fast guys
yes.
to come up with something. Thank you so much, Pavitra. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm sorry that Swapna is not with us here, Swapna Loka, but I don't know about you. I think that her take was just hilarious. And actually, in 3 days, this is the only time I was laughing away in the whole process as she talked about the mudras and the hastas, and she talked about emoticons and emojis, and you know, used the mushti as it was just hilarious. It was great fun. I remember many years ago when I was learning dance, you know, this urban rural divide. Uh, there are many divides in dance. Digital divide, I mean, we are a big community, but you know what, there's a giant community outside which doesn't have access to the digital platform, and so they can't be involved with it, and we should not be happy and stop it here that, you know, we've got a big community and things like that. There are many divides. There's the left brain, right brain divide, you know, those who think they're technologically oriented. There is this digital divide, and there is this divide amongst people who have rural and urban kind of thing. I remember when I was learning Kathak, there was this whole churning of the butter, which became a crisis because I would never get the proportions right. I had never churned butter. I had never seen anyone churn butter. I had never even seen a churn. I would never get the proportions right. It would look obviously like some kind of boxing, and many things like that would happen. And I remember telling my guru, I can't get it right. And he was aghast. And he said, how is butter made? I said, by a mixie. And, you know, I pressed that. And later we started using many other gestures. So this, she opened a whole new way in which gestures are used, and such a visual way. So I think that she's on a very winning wicket, and she should definitely be encouraged to continue in this humorous take of both the Nika and the contemporary times. Let me come to you, Prachi, now. And my question to you is the landscapes that you took, your own stillness and the landscapes that you took. What did you, what was driving you as you were doing that? The first landscape of the cars, and then the, you know, the waterside, and then the barren trees. Talk a little bit about how you visualized this work.
So exactly like everybody has spoken before, and particularly taking from Anita Akka and Douglas's. So I felt like I'm somewhere positioned in between, because I knew I had this one idea, which is slowing down, which had to be shown, but not as a padartha like we do in dance. Because the minute I say jab bachenge to milenge, it would just not convey the meaning, and it had to be done in a metamorphical and a more abstract sort of a way. But at the same time, I didn't want to move towards extreme abstraction, because I felt like you needed to show some visual support to the idea. So we did have extensive meetings, and this was entirely like a beautiful collaborative effort where the videographers Sejas and Isha came on board, and we kind of had extensive meetings for almost 2-3 weeks where we were discussing how do we want to visualize this whole thing. And the idea of slowing down was the basic premise, because I wanted to sort of build on that, which is why the cityscape, where everything is so fast paced, and then suddenly you cut to that landscape, which is so serene, and it immediately puts you in that frame of, okay, I feel like I have slowed down a bit. So that was the idea, and it was thanks to Sejas and Isha. They thought of this beautiful location, which is in Pune, and they said somewhere for your idea, what you're trying to say, this will just fit right, because it had the barren land, it had the burnt tree, it had the water body, and we wanted it to be somewhere even hopeful, not completely feeling hopeless, because which is why I use the word 2020 vision, because somewhere we need to make that change within ourselves. And like Douglas said, a lot of the things we did storyboard, but at the end we also left it at the editing table, because like the last shot where the line says "Raftar karo kam," I just had that eye shutting shot. It wasn't planned. It was just a shot that we took, and later it just kind of fits so perfectly, like almost epiphanical, like, oh my God, that is the moment, like you really feel like, okay, slow down. So, and again, I must confess, most of us, and Pavitra and Swapna will all agree, we are all thrown into this situation now where suddenly stage is not seen. So we are suddenly all with our cameras and wanna be filmmakers. So we are also learning as we go along, and we'll have our hiccups, we'll have our, course, but we'll get through somewhere, hopefully.
So I think you used a very beautiful word when you said epiphany. And that really is, if there can be a formula, the formula is for epiphany to happen, you have to do a judicious blend of detailed pre-planning, storyboarding and all that, and then some play.
Yeah.
How much is some is again a question. Like in Abhinay, you have the idea of Auchitya. So too you have the idea of you will know when, but you get to know only on the editing table. So the better part of valor is to take in extra and likely and potential shots and keep a diary of your shots so that you know where you can get to things. Coming back to you, Pavitra, for a moment, even as I say thank you to Prachi, is that Pavitra says Divya Goswami, is this composition a part of your production, Ranganath, the production that you have showcased on the proscenium? If so, how did you adapt it for camera? So that's your question. I'm coming back to you.
Yes, I'm here, ma'am.
Right.
Yeah.
So you heard the question.
This this was an extra music which was recorded during my production, Sri Ranganatha. Yes. So very good guest, Divya. So the Sri Ranganatha production was a 70-minute production, and this piece I wanted to open with. Yes. And then we recorded some other piece which was much better than this. So then I thought, why don't we use this piece now when we have some good opportunity? And what I had thought for the choreography, now, as you had mentioned, ma'am, just now, we also had to think about 3 or 4 additional choreographies on the spot. And when we put it on the editing table, we had to think what looks better, because we only had one light with us and one cameraman. So then accordingly, then you have to game it up very easily. And yes, performing on stage and performing for camera makes a lot of difference. You have space constraint. You just have like 9 boxes, and then you just have to move here and there, and you just have to adjust everything. So yes, there are a lot of space constraint, and but I think somewhere there is an advantage of facing the camera, or the camera faces you, and detailed expressions are seen much more. Abhinaya is very easily checked. For example, there was a place when I had to show that because the sun is rising, stars have lost their shine. The moon is just withering away. Is it because the clouds have come on the moon, or just because the sun has risen and the shine is so overpowering? This action could have been shown, we could show it better because we had a camera with us and we had to film it. The same thing we had, if at all it was on stage, we had to exaggerate much more with the hastabhinaya rather than the mukhaja abhinaya.
Right. Got it. So you basically have explained so well about how you have to keep many options in mind, because
Yes.
the cuts that a camera can take, you can't keep pulling the same thing. In live, you have no option to break and all that. There was one question that has been asked, and while Sumedha has answered it on the chat, I would like to throw it open to all the participants on our panel, and that is how easy is it to dance, the true dance as it were, without an audience present? And this is for all the panelists, whoever wants to say. And for some strange reason, and this question has been asked by Subodh Rathore from London, of Wise Thoughts. Yeah. Who wants to answer it? Okay, maybe we come back to it towards the end. Let me now ask my question to Sangeeta. I think it was your question. And I am taking on from a word that you use, drawn out of Douglas's writing, where you talk about corporeality and corporealizing. So while dance is often described as being a corporeal activity, in the Indian context, we see dance often as dissolving the body. Now, my question is particularly, in this context, lead us through the process by which the transcription of this dissolving the body shared idea with Sufi philosophy, to which you have hinted by having Rumi's poetry lead your film. So share with us the process by which you transcribed this philosophical thought into the dance visuals, imagery, and imagination that you have used in the film. It's almost redundant, but associated linked question is, how big a part did the capacities of the camera and editing play in the way you envisioned this whole process? Sangeeta, this is your question.
Yes. So it's interesting to even, start thinking in this way, that as that is why I was so intrigued to ask Douglas when I read about corporeality, because you have also seen my film Quest yesterday, and that was my first attempt, and it was very intuitive. I had no idea what I was doing. But then when I was conceiving Mirage, I had some exposure. I had some, when I was doing Quest, it was all handheld camera, and I was able to see that what camera is doing to my corporeal body. So from there, I took the hints, I think, very intuitively, and I tried to storyboard in a way, I would say, only conceptualized. That was only my storyboard, because I always wanted to play it out. When I went to the site, I had no idea what I would do. But one thing was definitely clear: what is my message? What is my intention? So that was very much clear, that I wanted to do something with the elusive nature of life, which I have been feeling during this pandemic. After Quest, I was very much into this feeling of how fragile life is, how ephemeral the life is, and how. So all that idea was coming into my mind, and I wanted to. Uh, I did not wanted to make it a narrative, which we are very used to in classical dance form. So I just wanted to make imageries of what mirage holds to us. It is illusion, it is something which I said it dissolves. And same happens when as a dancer, we approach dance. We somehow want to reach a point when we can dissolve our bodies and the dance only remains. So all that was part of my imagery. So I was more focused on creating an imagery rather than narrative. So that propelled me. Yeah.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you for almost leading me as if through a neat segue to my conversation with Lubdak, because I know Kathak dancers if I know anyone. I mean, most of all, I know Kathak dancers. And I know how upaj oriented they are, how mood oriented they are. They'll do one thing one day, and the poor light person will have worked it out, and the next day they will change it. And when the light person says, "But this is not what you did yesterday," mood tha, aaj ye ho gaya. So I can imagine this uncertainties of the imagination that Kathak dancers carry. More than any other form, Kathak dancers are totally upaj oriented. So while it's you could have storyboarded the idea, there was no telling what was going to happen there, right?
Absolutely.
So Lubdak was editing this film in another city using technologies available. So, Lubdak, my question to you is, how do you become of one heart? How do you become a sehridaya with the dancer, choreographer, particularly if they're going to be doing everything upaj oriented and you never know where things will go and where it'll flow? So that's my first question. And maybe you would like to take in the same sweep my second question, which is how much of the choreography happens as a super choreography on the edit table? So how far were you willing to go from the material that, or the linearity of the material that Sangeeta had sent you? Coming together, maybe telephone calls to stay in touch, but it's not the same as being there and working together. Like, say, Beanish and Sanjukta did in their film.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks a lot for having me on board on this wonderful panel, and also to Sangeeta ji for making me a part of both the projects, Quest and Viraj as well. So if I go direct to the question which you have asked, for me as an editor, first of all, I always think that I need to follow what the director actually aspires to, what she wants, what she is envisioning, because my part, or rather my function in this whole process is of collaboration and supporting her in a way so that whatever she has envisioned materializes into the final film. Initially, I got a brief from Sangeeta ji about the whole project, and then when I got all those footages, I mean, there was always a risk of completely taking it to a different path, because what happens with images are like fragmented images or images which has a lot of possibilities, abstraction, that you can create new forms, new spaces, new meanings, new narratives out of it. And especially which these kind of images gave me the option of, but somewhere down the line I knew that the central idea is originating from a point, and for me, and my role was very clear cut, that I need to be a Sahridya, as you mentioned, and it's only while I can have a good discussion with the director, it's only if I can really resonate with the idea or the seed from where, or the bindu from where this idea actually originated from Sangeeta ji, that I can really participate and support her in the best possible way. So that's it. My fundamentals was following her heart, her instructions at times as well. And if I talk about both the projects, because like both the projects were a part of the curation for this festival.
Could you speak a little louder, Lubdak? Because sometimes I lose you.
Am Am I audible now? Is it better?
Yes, this is
Okay.
better.
Yeah. So if I talk about both the projects, both Quest and Mirage, like Quest, last year it started from a very uncertain point because what Sangeeta ji gave me was just a very brief idea of what she was going through, and probably we were all going through because the lockdown was such a shocking point. I will call it shocking because we never expected it. And at that point of time, I mean, we did take a significant time in shooting as well, because I mean, she was doing it at her home during the first phase of the lockdown, and it was like preparing something through improvisations and then sharing it with me, and then we were also developing it. So it was always like discussing and developing, and that's how the whole montage actually happened. But for Miraj, I can say like she had a very clear idea, and the shooting actually happened in Delhi, and so like she was quite sure of what she wanted. Yet she did give me an option of forming a montage initially from the idea which she has shared with me, as well as from the images which I had received. And then it became a process of collaboration. Like I made a basic cut, and from there she took over. And as I mentioned, my idea was always to discuss with her and listen to what she wants. Because what happens if 3-4 people or other 2 people even start I mean, expressing their ideas like as a collaborator, I should. But somewhere down the line, I always feel that the director's chair should be respected, especially if he or she happens to be the person who has also conceptualized the whole process. And I mean, that was a very clear cut, trajectory for me, which made it easier. And talking about editing it in a different city, I mean, yes, definitely. If we could have been in the same space, discuss, it's always better. But I mean, as a professional editor, I've got used to this process quite frequently. So somewhere down the line, yes, one very important aspect is my personal relation with her. I have been knowing her since long time, and I mean, that really helps. I mean, especially when we have this issue of distance and not being able to meet the person. And also talking about the second question which you asked me about, how much of a super choreography it happens on the editing table. I mean, I will again say the same thing, like from the capacity of only an editor. So if I'm only the editor of a film, it's always about seeing the kind of possibilities which the idea and the images gives to me. I mean, how much I can actually support the core idea. And obviously there have been moments where I would like to share that this we can do this, we can try that, we can experiment with it. But it's always taking the director's call. But if for other projects where I am myself a director, which also have been doing, I mean, editing gives me a massive scope. Like personally, also resonating with what Douglas initially said, that I always believe in the chance factor, because for me chance is equivalent to grace. Like we can plan, we can have meticulous planning, storyboards and everything, but for me I would like to retake several times. And if it's permissible, like there are some logistics where I know I have to wrap up the shoot within a stipulated time, but if I get an option where I can retake, so it's always allowing the chance for factor to step in, and for me that becomes the grace, which is unexpected. Right. And we are just allowing it, and that chance factor is also permitted to come to play a role if on the editing table as well. And not just on the editing table, it also happens on sound until the final export is done. So from a directorial perspective, I can say post-production plays a massive role, and it's always about like juggling between images and forms. And I mean, if we are working on a very traditional narrative kind of an edit, then there are some like cause and effect relation, that this image or this moment will lead to the other. But if I'm working with innately abstract fundamental concepts, then that really opens up possibilities. And as an editor, as a director, then I feel I must push myself to think, or rather than being just rigid to one.
Right. I think a very important point that you have made is that people must hold space for the post-productive possibilities. Even as you prepare very carefully and take every opportunity that comes your way, including serendipity moments and things like that, post-production actually then determines which way things are
just
going
like
to be.
mention one thing, Arshia ji, as we are discussing this. And first thing, of course, what Lubdak has mentioned, that relationship makes a lot of difference, because that is what, coming from a same wavelength, having been worked, like, we have been working since long. So that makes a lot of difference. And one thing is that, as you said, that though the storyboard was planned but for particularly for my film, there was no music. I had no idea of what music it would be. So music was the last thing which happened to the film. So that is also quite, I was very nervous that what would happen to the
So
music, but
actually, I want you then to go back momentarily to the question that Subodh Rat or asked, which is, how does it feel to dance with no audience? This is not riyaz you're doing. This is showing. Okay, it is going to show later, but it is a showing. It's part of the showing process. And now you tell me that you do not even have the music. So how does it feel in that case? How did it feel for you?
well, if I have to first, let me answer Subodhji's question, and I think all of us here would agree to that nothing replicates, replicates the experience of what we have on stage. It is a very different experience. It is a lived experience, and that cannot be replaced by anything else. And the energy, the most important thing is that energy that flows between the audience and the artist during the time of the performance, it's very different. And whereas when you are creating a film or working for a camera, it is again, I would come back to the word which I have been like very fond of, corporeality. So we are Douglas, I have really fallen in love with this word, I believe. So it's a very interesting phase where you are able to recreate and resurrect, I would say, something which has died. When you perform, the form dies, right? And then you
Right.
resurrect from there and create something.
I
So
think
that's
that's a
very
very
interesting.
interesting insight. Very interesting insight. That while, I mean, in pure performance, it just dies at that time. But in film, you get a chance to resurrect it. So thank you very much for these very, very interesting answers, very interesting discussions. Sangeeta, maybe you would like to come up. You said that you had some things you wanted to ask towards the
I'm
end.
afraid that we are really pulled off, quite. But I'm really thankful to all the viewers who are still there, and thanks to all of you. Just one last question, because when I spoke to all of you, and thanks to all of you that you could come up with such beautiful work of yours and generously shared it for Chakshu. And I would also lastly ask Douglas to ask any questions that he would have to any of the panelists. But before that, I just wanted to ask you that when you created your film, and as most of you said that it was first time, uh, through whose eye you were looking at your films? Like, as a dancer, as a filmmaker, or what was the eye that you were uh, looking at your film? Anyone can answer, I think. Yeah.
I've noticed that anyone can answer questions, don't get answer. Everybody thinks the other guy is going to.
Prachi, if you would start that, like, what is your take on that?
For me, I think at the onset, I was very clear that the camera had to be the eye, and the viewer was my primary viewpoint. Considering attention spans are very limited, and also like Anitaka mentioned earlier, 10-second films are being made these days. So I had to keep in mind that if I have to make a film with the camera and for the phone, it had to have the length which was just right to consume. In the sense of, as classical dancers, we can get very indulgent. We want to stay with the flower opening for a very long time on stage, like 4-hour tanams, and we could just show the opening of a flower and a bee. That had to be altered. So I didn't want to compromise where, you get self-indulgent and forget the viewer completely, because all it takes is a swipe and a brush aside. So for me, that idea was very clear, and which is why the storyboarding, the cuts, the dissolves and everything to tell the story in a short span of time. So that was clear for me.
Prachi, you've almost answered a question that Mom Ganguly has asked. What is the role of momentary movements and emotions that somehow are missing but remain frozen in time through films. So you've talked about how you have to cease to be indulgent. Actually, this is a very important clue that Prachi has given. You have to be brutal with yourself when you're making a film. You cannot be indulgent, you cannot be expansive. Minimalism is normally the better bet. So, is there anyone else who wants to answer the question that Sangeeta asked?
Or I would request Douglas or Sumedha, anybody, amongst yourself, you just want to, we are in a verge of closing it, but as we have Douglas here and he has been there all the 3 days, if you have any observations that you would like to share or ask, it will be interesting.
Can I just have a small sharing if it's okay?
Yes.
I must say that I've been attending the last 2 days and it has opened up my imagination to a whole lot of possibilities. I've watched all the films over the 2 days and such brilliant curation, thanks to Arshia ji and Sangeeta both, because as wannabe filmmakers, which I call ourselves, we have realized that what all, like Akshara has left a brilliant mark in my psyche, because just the possibility of what camera and dance can do. So thank you, and I will just stop at that.
Thank you so much, Prachi. Sumedha or Douglas, would you like to say a few words, because we really need to wrap it up soon? This has been one indulgent showcase, 3 hours almost.
Douglas, you have to unmute yourself if you wish to.
Okay, I can't see anything
Sorry.
right now.
Okay.
Yes. Oh.
Yes, Douglas.
So I'd love to, I'd be happy to talk a little bit, given I know that you're running out of time, because I took a lot of notes over the last few days watching things, and I'm trying to sort of find the most pertinent ones. And so some of so I take notes when I watch people's work, and some of them are in the form of questions. So one of the things that I noticed that I wrote about while I was watching, I don't know, maybe yesterday or today, that it seems like one of the things that's happening in culturally in your community, and for me as an outsider, is that there's a kind of a shared vision of how, or a shared approach to solving the problem of how to negotiate traditional dance with the art form of screen dance. So how to negotiate or how to navigate the traditional with the contemporary, because screen dance is really a contemporary postmodern phenomenon. Filmed dance, there's been films of dancing since the invention of film. So that's not new. Those things go hand in hand. And I know I've seen a lot of films of Indian dance from the 50s, I think, 40s and 50s, beautiful films. But screen dance is particularly a postmodern event. And so we have it, all over the world where there's kind of classical or embedded dance training, whether it's modern dance or classical Indian dance or anything like that. But navigating the tensions between the two is, I think, what the interesting part is. That's the interesting piece. And I noticed just today both in Sangeeta and Sumedha's work seem to be at the spectrum of trying to adapt some kind of classical training to a very, very contemporary lens. And then various versions of that in between. So the other thing I want to say is that every maker, but also every technology has a different set of desires. So what we might want from technology has a different set of desires oftentimes. We might want a camera to do a particular thing, but the technology of filmmaking, the technology of cameras want to do something else. So that's a tension, I think, that's interesting to think about. I heard somebody mention the gaze, I think it was Sumedha earlier, talked about the gaze. And I forget the context, Sumeda. What was the context you mentioned the gaze in? I didn't write it down.
I think I was mentioning about the
surveillance and the
surveillance.
camera business.
Right. So what's so interesting to me about the work that I've seen in the last few days is that, and I think it's maybe primarily Kathak and Bharatanatyam, if I'm correct, the forms that I'm seeing. Is that correct? Is that fair to say?
Probably the maximum that you have seen is of Bharatnatyam, but there has been a bit of Kathak as well.
Okay, thank you. But I noticed that in
And today is
Bharatanatyam, the gaze is directed at me very particularly, at me, the viewer. That the gaze is a very powerful force coming from the other side of the camera. And when we talk about the gaze, and I think when Sumeda was talking about the gaze, I think you're talking about the gaze of the camera, sort of traditional discussion we have about from Laura Mulvey about the male gaze particularly. So what's interesting about the dancing in a lot of the films I've seen is that the gaze coming from the performer is so strong and so confrontational already. And then the filmmakers are in a way trying to deconstruct that gaze or simply to receive that gaze. But I would say that's another tension that I think is something that's worth talking about. And then a couple more things and I'll stop talking. And the word deconstruction I want to use also, because one of the things that you know, postmodernism and globalism too asks us to do is to deconstruct the things that we're looking at and to think about them in a different way. And if our intentionality is to conserve the form that we're making, that we're inscribing on film, right? To conserve the linearity or the traditions of a particular kind of dance, for instance, then we can't really engage in a critical way with those things that we're looking at. So I would say that that's another, maybe that's the last tension that I'll mention. But that's my response for the moment.
Thank you very much. That is a very, very significant input that you have given about not protecting the dance form inscribed, but the idea and intention that needs to be conveyed, and using the potential that camera and the editing table allows you for such a thing. So I mentioned to you that I feel that this is a tipping point. This is a tipping point in this whole search of dance and the camera, and your presence over these last 3 days has certainly contributed to firming that moment. Thank you so much, Douglas. There were many other questions I wanted to ask you, but maybe bilaterally, and maybe someday we could all meet as a community with nothing but discussions and interactions. We will go by your convenience, and all of us will make our time fit in with yours. Okay.
My pleasure.
Up at the crack of dawn, we'll stay up late, no problem. Thank you very much for these 3 days of support, 3 days of viewing, the hundreds of people who have joined us, the many who have shared their work most generously, despite it being very difficult times. And you can imagine how difficult those times were, because you saw how moved Aditi, one of the strongest performers as a performing artist goes, was when she made her presentation yesterday. So these are difficult times, but I salute each one of you for finding a via media to still stay on top, to still stay afloat with your head above the water and sharing despite that. So hats off to you all. And Sangeeta, thank you very much for putting this together. Thank you for being determined and gritty in seeing this thing through. Loved being part of it. Thanks.
It was never possible without you, Arshaji, and all of my, co-dancers for today, all of them who have joined, and all the panelists since last 3 days. It would haven't been possible without all of you and all the viewers who are watching us for such a long time. I'm really thankful, grateful, and I'm sure we are going to take it forward and do something better next time. Thank you. Thank you so much.